Hey everybody, I am Jeffrey Way, and in this week's video tutorial we're going to learn how to build a 3-level menu. So this is one of maybe the most common requests that I receive, and I think it's because every single web designer or web developer at some point has built a menu. You probably build it for every single project. So a very common thing is just to build a nice looking menu, maybe with a submenu and maybe with a 2-level submenu. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to learn how to make it work in browsers, and then we're going to enhance it with a little bit of JavaScript to add a little bit of animation, kind of a nicer feature. This is going to work in IE 6, 7, and 8, Firefox, Opera, Safari, Chrome, etc. The only thing it won't work in is Internet Explorer 6 with JavaScript disabled. So when you figure the percentage of users in IE 6, you're looking at around, depending on your website, around 10%. And then the percentage of those that have JavaScript disabled is going to be so low that it's not even really worth dealing with. So let's take a look at our final product. So kind of a bunch of cool features here. We're going to be taking advantage of browser extensions, vendor extensions for like gradients, like here when I hover over. There's no images in this, so we get kind of nice gradients. We have borders, we have a second level, and you can see when you hover over it kind of slides down. We're going to be using the jQuery library for that. And this will work, so let's go ahead and disable JavaScript and see what happens. Refresh the page, and now when I hover over it, it's just automatic, but it still works just fine. And that's the whole point of JavaScript, is we just want to enhance it to make it a little bit nicer, as you can see, and then it fades out when you let go. All right, so let's get into this. We're going to build it from scratch. I'm going to close that out, and I've created a new project on my desktop. Got an index.html file, and then 2 blank files for our CSS and our scripts. So you can see those 2 are blank. All right, let's begin. And the first thing, of course, is we're going to link to our style sheet. And the href is going to be css/style.css. Okay. And then at the bottom, we're going to link to a few more things. We're going to link to jQuery, of course. And let's open that up. And then next, we want to, actually, we don't need that. Let's link to, there we go. Sorry, different text editor than I'm used to. And the source is going to be js/scripts.js. Okay, so we're all set to begin. The first step is we have to create our menu. So basically, when you want to create submenus, you would have within your unordered list, you'd have a list item, and then you would have an anchor tag. And then the key to creating a submenu is, rather than simply closing out your list item, I'm using shorthand here, rather than closing out the list item, you would embed another UL. So here you would do UL, and then same thing again, like so. And then you would close that UL, and then you'd close your list item. And that way, you can create a submenu. And then you would simply set this sub-unordered list to display none unless you're hovering over its list item parent. And then you can do this again if you decide that you want to create a 3rd level like we did. You would just embed another unordered list and continue like so. So I'm going to go ahead and paste it in because it's a lot of typing, and we'll quickly go over it. So let's take a look. We have a parent unordered list with an ID of nav. There's where it closes. Then we have just some list items. We have home, about, but we want about to have a submenu. So before I close the list item, as you can see up here, we add a child unordered list, and then we have about us, about them, about you, just sample. And we have a 3rd level menu in this one as well. And you can see I've once again added another UL. So we add our items, we close out the UL, we close out the list item for this submenu, we close out the UL for our first submenu, and then originally close our list item for the about item. And it's as simple as that. Then we have another portfolio that won't have a menu, and contact will, and here we're pretty much doing the exact same thing as we did in about, where we have 2 nested submenus. And finally, we just have 1 more mission statement. So pretty simple. If we want to take a look how this looks, I'm going to go up into menu, index.html, and unstyled, this is what we end up with. Okay, so the first step, of course, is to begin styling it. So as I usually do, we're going to do this together in the browser so you get some automatic feedback. So the first step we need to do, this is not necessary, it's just for sample. We're going to do font family for the body, and I'm going to do just Helvetica, fall back to Arial, fall back to sans serif, and I'm going to give a background. Once again, this isn't necessary for our menu, just to have a little bit of contrast. Okay, let's begin. Menu. Should be good to label. And we're going to do nav, and this is going to target that parent UL. And let's first give it a background of E5, E5, E5. And that's just a slightly different color. You probably can't even tell actually here, but it is slightly different. Though honestly, that's probably not even necessary. And I'm going to float this to the left, and I'll explain why shortly. It's referred to as shrink wrapping, so we'll go over that in a bit. And I'm going to set the margin. By default, unordered lists have some default styling, so we're just going to make sure any margins or padding is going to be zeroed out, and you can see that changes it slightly. Next, we're going to put a border around this of 1 pixel solid white just for visuals, and you can see it right there. And I don't want a border on the bottom, so most of this is just preference. Okay, there we go. So now we're ready to begin. Obviously, if we want a menu, we need to float some items, right? Now here's one key, and this is something I learned, and when you're dealing with list items and anchor tags, it can be easy to kind of switch between adding padding and margins to the list item, and then you add your own set of padding and margins to the anchor tag child, and then you end up with these areas where I'm sure you're familiar with it, where the anchor tag, maybe you set a background color and it's not as big as the list item, and you have to try set display block or change the width and height. It gets really confusing. So use this as a rule of thumb. When possible, apply all of your specifics like the width, height, padding, margin, background. Apply that to the child element. So apply it to the anchor tag, and then the parent or the list item will mold itself to contain it. So it's kind of a good practice that I've learned. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do nav li A, and then we'll also do the list item, and we're going to float these to the left. And right off the bat, you're going to see that gets a lot better. But of course, we have these child elements, so we're going to first get rid of that. So nav li ul, and this is going to target any list items that have ULs as children or any submenus, and we'll put that in submenu. And what we want by default is for that to be display set to none, and that's going to hide them, leaving us with just our standard menu like we would hope. All right, now let's go into our standard list item. And we will do list style is going to be none, and that's going to get rid of the bullets. And then I'm going to set a position relative. And this is important because we want our submenus to be positioned relative to the list item that they're contained within. We need to set a positioning context to that parent list item. It's very important. Okay, let's continue. And now, like I said, we're going to try to do as much styling within the anchor tag as we can. The first thing that I'll do is I'm going to set some padding all around, about 1ems and 2em. That'll be top and bottom and left and right respectively. And we'll leave it, maybe zoom out just a little bit. There we go. And now we're starting to get an actual menu. The next step is, I don't want any text decoration, so let's set that to none. And I want the background to be almost black, like so. Don't want that blue color. I'm going to set that to white. And now already it's looking a lot better. But we can do better than this. I want to use some CSS3 features. So we're going to have to use vendor extensions. So first one will be fallback for like IE. And that's going to be a fallback of 29, 29, 29. But we've already done that here. So I'll take that and move it down. And now we're going to use some vendors. So we'll first start with Firefox. And if you watched the CSS3 tutorial, or I'm sorry, you read it last week, you'll have learned some of these properties. First one's going to be Moz linear gradient, and this wants to know first, where does the gradient begin? It's going to begin at the top. What's going to be the beginning color? It's going to be black, and I want it to fade to 3C, 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 which is just a lighter shade. And then I'm going to set that to 1 pixel, and I know this is going to be confusing, but just let me finish this and then we'll go over it. Okay, so now if I zoom in, you should be able to see that we have a light gradient. You can see at the very top that color is going to be a lot different than it is right here. So how is this possible? We're doing Moz, so we're targeting Mozilla browsers or mostly Firefox. We're beginning at the top, and we're going to do black, and then we're going to go to 3C, 3C, 3C for 1 pixel, and that's what's going to give us this nice little shade at the top. And then we're going to continue to just a lighter shade of black for 25 pixels. So if I wanted, I could just leave that off, and you're going to see that it changes slightly, and you get a difference. But here I'm saying I want the gradient to continue for 25 pixels. Okay, so that's nice. We just a very subtle gradient. And we need to take care of WebKit as well. So I'm going to do WebKit. And note that you're not going to see any changes here, of course. You're going to see it when you view it in Safari and Chrome. And this one, unfortunately, it's a little bit different from Mozilla's interpretation. We're going to do WebKit gradient. And this time we're going to specify it's a linear gradient. And we're going to begin at the left top. And we're going to end, meaning begin our gradient and end our gradient, at left 25, or we could do left bottom if we wished. Either one doesn't really matter. And we'll do from, and we're going to begin at black, and we're going to go to, actually we'll start with the color stop, and we're going to stop at 4%, and once again that's going to be 3C, 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 and then finally we're going to go to 29, 29, 29. So I know it's confusing. What I usually do is I just copy a sample gradient into maybe something like Sniply. That way it's easy to forget, and you can just grab it and change it as you need. So let me see what I have here. And looks like we need to close out that extra parentheses. So if I come back, and now we are left with a nice menu. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to come back to Coda, and I'm going to paste this into style.css like so. And let's just go and make sure that it is working correctly in Safari. So I'm going to open up menu, index, and make sure that that gradient is in fact working. And if I zoom in, it looks like no, it's not. So we know that we made some mistake. And we can see right here, if we look, you can see we go from black, but then we immediately go into color stop. So we want to make sure that there's a comma right there. Come back, refresh the page, and now you can see a nice gradient. So good. I'm going to go ahead and close out Safari, and we can continue on. Save that, and come back, paste that new edited in, and we can continue. So the next step is, after our custom backgrounds, I want to do some borders. So I'm going to do border right, and it's going to be 1 pixel solid. Once again, 3C, 3C, 3C. And if I zoom in, once again, you see we're adding just a lighter shade of gray black. Next, let's do the same thing for left. And this is going to be a darker shade of black. And if I zoom out, you can see that's just kind of a nice, kind of looks like an inset. And the key is to do a darker shade immediately followed by a lighter shade. Now I'm going to do border bottom. You know, it's the little things that make the big differences in these kind of menus. So we have a darker shade, and finally border top is going to be 1 pixel solid, 54, 54, 54. And you can see we're pretty much doing the same kind of feature. Okay, so now we're going to make some changes. L-I-A, and then when you hover over an anchor tag, note, once again, I'm not applying the hover event to the list item, I'm applying it to the anchor tag. We're going to change the background to 2A0D65. And now we're adding a nice purple color. And you know, there's nothing special about these colors. It's just a matter of going to Photoshop and picking something that looks good to you. So by default, we want this to be purple when you hover over it. I'm going to zoom out now. And we have a nice menu. Note that we aren't doing any JavaScript whatsoever. Now let's do some gradients as well. So once again, we're going to do Moz linear gradient, and this one's going to be a lot simpler. We're going to start at the top, and we're going to go from 11032E, and this is a dark purple, to A06 or D65. And that's it. So we can make our gradients as easy or as complicated as we want. But now when I hover over, see that really nice, I mean, that's just a rich gradient, and we're not using any backgrounds. Look at that, really nice looking. Now, something you need to note is Firefox just added support for gradients in Firefox 3.6. So if you're even in 3.58 is where I think it is right now for the older version, you're not going to see it, but it's okay. We're just enhancing. In those browsers, you're simply going to see the standard purple. No harm, no foul. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out, and now we're getting a really nice, rich-looking menu. Once again, I'm going to take care of WebKit. WebKit gradient, and we're going to do linear, and if we're going to start at left top, and then we're going to go to left all the way to the bottom. And I kind of like WebKit's version more. It's a little more intuitive because you can specify from and to A0D65. There we go, and that's going to take care of WebKit. So that looks really good. I'm going to come back and paste this in, close that out, refresh the page, and now with just a minimal amount of work, we created a really good looking menu. Now we get to enable the drop-down functionality. First, we're going to make it work in CSS, then we're going to enhance it with JavaScript. So nav, li, get all of the submenus, and display none. We're going to set left to 0, but you know what we're going to do? While we're working on it, there's no need for it to be display none. Let's go ahead and set it display to block. That way we can get a better idea of what we're working with. So I'm going to set left to 0, but in order to work with left and top values, I need a positioning context, right? So position, and here's the key with your submenus. They can't be positioned relative, otherwise they're going to screw with your entire menu. You need to make sure that they're positioned absolutely, that way they don't interfere with the flow of the page. And now you can see that makes a big difference, and you start to end up with an actual menu. Okay, so let's continue on. Left 0, I'm going to make sure, once again, any possible padding or margin is set to 0. And there you go, and you see that makes a big difference. And originally it's going to be none, and then when you hover over it, we're going to set the display to block, in which case it's going to look like this. Okay, not quite there, but we're going to get there. Now you see how when you hover over it, ultimately, look how the submenu is actually at the very top. And the way we can do this is we want to make sure the submenu only begins at the very bottom of its parent element. And I want to note one more thing. Remember how up here we said position to relative? Look what happens when we remove that. It changes. That's why we're going to position the submenu absolutely in relation to its nearest positioned parent. And that makes a big difference. Okay, so now we have padding 0, margin 0. We're going to set top to 100%. And what that is going to do is it's going to push it from the top 100% of its parent's height. And that'll position it nicely right underneath. Okay, so we're already ending up with something really nice. Let's continue forward. And now nav li, when you hover over it, then get the list item, or I'm sorry, then get the unordered list that follows it and set display to block. So let's go ahead and change this back. And now we're going to do display block, and you're going to see our menu taking shape. Hover over it, and note that we have our submenu, but also the sub-menu as well, and we're going to have to work with that. Same thing with contact. And also note how the width of each of these is a different size because of it's dependent upon the length of the text inside. We're going to have to hard code a width in that as well. Let's continue, and we're going to set position to absolute. Even though it's already set there, we can probably get away with removing that. We're going to set padding in 0. That's good too, so we can just leave it like so. Next, I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to do nav li ul li and then nav li ul lia. Okay, so that looks jumbled. Let's just decode it. It's very simple. Get the list item, get the UL, meaning get any submenus, and then get the submenus list items. So this is targeting, if we go back, this is targeting the submenus list items, or these, and these. So So, and then we're also going to get the anchor tags as well, just to make sure that we're being consistent. And I'm going to make sure that if you see above, we floated them to the left because we wanted this horizontal menu. See, if I remove that, they default to display block. I want to make sure that our submenu, we want it to be displayed as a block. So I'm going to make sure I set float to none. Okay, and that's going to change some things, but don't worry. We'll fix that shortly. Next, I'm going to do nav li ul li. And all I'm going to do here is a fix for Internet Explorer 6. Don't worry about this too much. We're simply going to set display to inline. You know, as you guys, if you're compensating for IE6, sometimes really weird properties are required. This one actually took me a while. What was happening is when I hovered over one of these items and I came to a submenu, I was suddenly getting this extra like 10 pixels of white space, and I couldn't figure it out. And I set display to inline, and that did it. So maybe it was a margin padding issue. I'm not sure. But this is only for IE6. We're going to use a hack to target IE6 exclusively using the underscore. If you're uncomfortable with that, simply use conditional statements and import an IE6 style sheet, or just add that style. For the sake of quickness, we're just going to do it like this. Next, I'm going to continue on, and we're going to do nav li ul lia, and this is simply going to target all of the anchor tags like these. Okay. Come back, and within here, we're going to set a width, and I'm just going to say hovered over that. I'm going to set a width of 150 pixels. And continuing on, I'm going to set display to block. And now that's the big key, display block. And that'll force them to take up the entire width that you set, or 150. And now we can get a consistent 150 no matter when you hover over them. So cool, you're already getting a very nice looking menu, but we do have a problem in that, as I said before, the sub menu is displaying, and what we really should only be seeing is about us, about them, and about you. And then when you hover over about you, then we see more about us, more about them, more about you. But also, it probably would look weird if we hover over about you and then it gets longer. We should make sure that more about us, more about them, and more about you, actually, maybe we should have it come off to the right, so it's almost like a new step almost. So let's see how we can do that. I'm going to come down, and I'm going to set a new one just for my sake, because it can get confusing when you have these long strings. So I'm going to set this to sub menu, so I know what I'm referring to. And we're going to do nav li ul li. And now this is targeting, and I want to make sure I go over this. Now we're targeting the sub ul. So we're not getting the first one, we're targeting li ul li ul. We're targeting these. And these are the third levels of the menu. Nav li ul li ul. And I'm going to set display to none as well. So we're kind of duplicating this almost. If I wanted, I could even take this and put it up at the top. Where did I set it? I set it somewhere. Anyhow, it's not important, but we could group these together. I'm going to keep it like this because it's easier for me. Now when I hover over it, now if I hover over this, how come that the submenu is still displaying? And the reason is we need to override it. So for instance, if you ever can't understand why something isn't taking effect, try applying important after it. Now, 99% of the time you don't want to keep this in. It's only for testing. There are a couple times when it actually does make sense to keep this into your style sheet. With that said, 99% of the time, just use it for testing. And now if I hover over it, it disappears. So we know we have a weight issue, so to speak. So the way we're going to fix this is when we hover over our list item right here, and we set display to block, this means find any list items and then get all of the ULs that are children of it. And that includes the first UL and the sub UL. So what we're going to do here is if we want to target only the immediate child, so if we want to say target only the unordered list here, but not this one, we need a way to select only immediate children and not all descendants. And we do have a way to do that, and it's using, you might have seen this before, this little sign right here. And now this means when you hover over a list item within the navigation UL, get all ULs, but only the ULs that are immediate children of the list item. Don't get any other descendants. And now if I hover over it, I'm only going to see that one. And now when we hover over About You at the bottom, they show up. But remember, we don't want it to continue. We want these to show up off to the right. And you might think we have to use JavaScript with that, but no, we can continue using CSS. We can do quite a bit with CSS. So let me add display none again, just to be sure. And we're going to do nav li ul li. And now when you hover over a submenu, then get that submenu, and we're going to move it over to the left 100% because we want it shifted over from the left as wide as the submenu is. So now if I hover over it, okay, it's been shifted over 100% of the width, but now it's down. We need to push it up. So remember, these ULs are positioned absolutely, so we can position them at the very top of its parent. And now when I hover over it, look at that, a nice menu. Go over to contact, and we get the same thing. If I zoom out just a bit, come over it, and now we have our nice submenu. Go over to About, same thing. Really cool. And that is it for our CSS. So that wasn't too rough. A lot of times, you just got to play around with it, and then once you have a menu you like, you can use it across most of your projects without having to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. So let's refresh, and finally, the last step without JavaScript, let's look over it. Nice gradients, nice submenus, nice submenus, looks really good. And let's go into, whoops, just refresh, and let's go into Safari and see how that looks as well. Hover over it, we still have our nice gradients. And you know what? It looks like we have a small problem. The submenus look good. It looks like I did make one mistake. I'm not seeing that nice gradient in Safari like I thought I was. Let's go back, and the problem is going to be when we hover over it. Okay, we have our background for IE. We have our background for Firefox. That's working, so the problem is going to be here. And it's just because the syntax can be confusing. Let's make sure we got it right. WebKit gradient, it's going to be linear. It's going to go from left top to left bottom. And yeah, here's the problem right here. You can't have spaces, so it's not like you can do that if you want. You need to make sure there's no spacing. So I'm going to get rid of the space right here. And after from to you need to make sure you have a comma. And I think that's going to make the difference. If we come back, refresh the page, yeah, and now we get that really deep, nice looking glow. If I zoom out, looks really good. Okay, so now, fun part, we've finished the JavaScript, we've finished the style sheets. Now we can get into adding just a little bit of enhancement using JavaScript. So we come back to index.html. I'm importing jQuery. I'm importing our scripts.js file. And just for fun, why don't we, not altogether necessary, but assuming we have a bigger project, why don't we kind of take an object-oriented approach? So let's create our single wrapping variable for our site. This way we don't have to deal with multiple globals, which can clash with other scripts, and it's just generally a really bad thing. So we're going to call it site, and then when we want to instantiate, we're going to do new site, and this will run whatever we tell it to. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do here is create some variables. So this .nav.li, we're going to cache pretty much the location of the list items. That way we don't always have to traverse the DOM looking for it, right? So that's going to be equal to nav and li, and this, we can use this in all browsers because we are executing it with JavaScript. This just means, once again, find only the list items that are direct children of the nav UL, not all descendants that are list items. Now here's one cool feature that you can do. We can do it like this, but we also need to do something like get nav, or we could do it like this. We could do this .nav li .children, and we need to get the submenu, and then we got to do CSS, and I need to set display to none, which I'll just explain shortly, and then we could do like that. But did you know this? we can actually put this all onto the one line. So if I were to copy that right there and paste it in and make sure we add our period. So now we have .children, CSS, display to none, and then I'm going to do end. So what do we do here? This is just kind of a little bit of a shortcut. So we're creating a variable called navli, and we're going to make it equal to all list items. But we're going to go ahead and get a little more work done here. We're also going to go get the UL, that's submenu, and set the CSS, and we're going to set the display equal to none. And then I'm going to call end, which brings us back to the list item. Because here we're working with the UL, but if we want to go back to our original selection, we can do end. And now navli is still equal to this. We were just able to do a little bit of work before we created the variable. Now, next, why did we set display equal to none? And it's because with our CSS, by default, when you hover over a item, it's going to display automatically. But we instead want to use JavaScript to slide it down. So we're going to make sure that we override that style sheet and set the display to none. And now we're going to call something like this.init. And this will kind of initiate our project to do whatever we need to do, among other things, creating our menu. So the way we can reference methods in the object-oriented way is we're going to do site.prototype. It's going to be equal to a new object. We're going to override it. And the first one is going to be init. And this is where we can, like if you're working in PHP with a class, you might create any variables you need, do any maybe data access you need. Here, this would be a whole website ideally, so we would do other things. Here we're just going to do set menu. And that's going to be a method specifically for adding the functionality for our menu. And if we want to comment this, we'll do enables slide down menu and add support for IE6 and 7. Now, actually it should really be IE6. If we come back here, you notice that we have this right here. Internet Explorer 6 isn't going to understand what that is at all. It has no idea how to work with that. So there are some workarounds. We're going to import a script by Dean Edwards, and we're also going to do a little bit of work here. So here's my set menu, and that's going to be equal to a function. And we have a little bit of code format editing. Look right there. Need to make sure that's a comma. And look at all the stuff I'm missing. That's the problem when you're talking and explaining, you leave off little things. Okay, so now we're set to begin with our set menu. And I'm going to do this.navli, or reference all immediate children of the unordered list. And when you hover over those, we're going to run a function. And this is pretty much mouse over. And when you mouse off, we're going to run another function. So if you want to comment this, mouse over and mouse out. Okay, so what do we want to do? When you hover over it, we're going to get this. This is equal to the list item that was hovered over. And we're going to find the unordered list, or find the submenu. And I'm going to call stop. We're going to modify that shortly, but then we're going to call slide down. And it's going to slide down over the course of 250 milliseconds, or about 1/4 of a second. Come back, refresh. Now when I do it, it does slide down. But we have this problem again. Now with JavaScript, when I refresh, it shows all of the submenus. We don't want that. So once again, we're going to do find this, and now it's going to find immediate children and not all children that are unordered lists. Refresh, hover over it, and now it slides down like we would hope. But we need to do the mouse out now, and we're going to do, once again, find UL, stop, and this time I don't want it to slide up. Why don't we do a fade out? And that's going to fade out over 1/5 of a second. And now when I come out, go down, and then as soon as I go off of it, it fades out. But now we have this new problem. Watch what happens when I hover over these. You see, we already had this problem, now it doesn't come up. So let's try it again. And you just get lots of weird problems. And eventually, look, when I hover over it, now it won't even go up. And that's because we're calling stop. And what stop does is, if you guys haven't experienced this, I should probably go over it. If you are aware of it, you can skip ahead a couple minutes. Watch what happens when we do this over and over. You see that? And it's because you're running over the animation so many times that the animation has to complete before the next animation occurs. And if you do this a bunch of times, it'll just keep running until the animations are finished. So the way around it is to call stop. But then you have the problem where if you hover over it, come out and hover back, it stops in its tracks and continues back. But then you get these weird issues where it doesn't work like you would hope, and the width changes and the height changes. A way around this is to set true, true, and this will force the animation to complete like this. So now if I hover over it, and I hover over really fast, we don't get any problem, but the animation does complete. Okay, so you can play around with that. But now we have a nice menu. You hover over. When I hover off, it fades off. So if you want to make sure that's working, why don't we change this to 1000, which is way too slow, but we can see the effect a little more, and it fades out. Okay, I think quick will be the best method. And there we go. So let's check this in Safari. We're not doing too much with JavaScript. But when we hover over it, it slides down. That's going to work in IE8 too. There we go. It looks great. So let's go back to Coda, and this is pretty much it for our file. This might seem a little over, like too much for maybe we can just do it like this, but assuming you have a full project, this is kind of a nice object-oriented way to work on your project. That way you have one global variable, and then within init you can call any other methods that you would be working with for any other reasons. And all of it's encapsulated to this one set menu method that's easy to understand. Okay, so the final thing that we have to do is we need to take care of some issues with IE6. So I already showed you this one right here where we had to set display inline. The only other thing is we need to, and I do this in general for all websites now, it's not worth dealing with. It's a extra, I don't even know how large it is, 20K or so, but it's really worth it. And if they're using IE6, you know, screw them, so to speak. So they can deal with an extra 28K. So I'm going to import a script by Dean Edwards, and it's called IE8. And all of this does is it enables advanced CSS selectors and stylings for browsers that are below IE8. So the original idea was it takes any Internet Explorer browser below IE8 and it gives it that functionality. It allows functionality for CSS3 selectors like this one, if I can find it, like this one right here. With this script, IE6 will understand what that means. And this is what you should always be doing. Don't immediately begin compensating for the oldest browser and try to do your best. Compensate for the best browsers and then work back and see what you can do for IE6. And in this case for me, who cares? They can deal with an extra 20K if it makes my life easier. And now it's going to work just great in all browsers. The only time it won't work is it's not going to work in IE5, but nobody cares. It won't work in IE6 if JavaScript is disabled. Other than that, and that's a very low percentage, it's going to work perfectly. And now we are finished with our 3-level menu. And my name's Jeffrey Way. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, don't forget to follow net.tuts+ for the best tutorials, quick tips, and screencasts available on the web. And you can also find us at twitter.com/nettuts. And finally, if you're still with me, always be sure to check out themeforest.net if you are a web designer and you want to sell templates and themes. And CodeCanyon if you're a developer and you want to sell maybe PHP scripts, JavaScripts, ASP.NET components, lots of really cool stuff. Be sure to check that out. Once again, I'm Jeffrey Way. Thank you for watching.